Why did the valley feel so wrong that morning? It was the kind of silence that pressed against the skin, not empty, but holding its breath. Sergeant Elellanena Ruiz noticed it before she even realized she'd stopped blinking. Her boots crunched against the dry Afghan gravel. Steady, deliberate, but her senses were somewhere else. The sun hadn't climbed high yet, only smearing pale light across the jagged ridges. In that half-light, shadows stretched long and strange across the convoy trail, like the mountains themselves. When leaning closer, she'd been embedded with a Navy SEAL team for this op, an unusual pairing, but not her first. The mission was simple on paper. Track down a high-value insurgent commander believed to be hiding in the Arandu sector. Simple never lasted long in country. Ruiz walked rear security. It was a role she liked. The quiet watch. The sense of having everyone's back. Her rifle was slung tight, eyes moving from ridge to ridge. Years of fieldwork had tuned her body to catch the smallest anomalies. The faint ripple of fabric in the wind. The flicker of movement in the wrong place. This morning, it wasn't something she could see. It was something she couldn't. No. Birds, no goats, no distant chatter from villagers on the trails. Just wind and bootsteps. The man leading the column, Chief Mason Carter, raised his fist, a silent command to freeze. Every soldier stilled instantly. Then the air cracked. Low, distant boom rolled across the valley. And before her mind could name it, the world detonated. Gunfire erupted from the rocks on both sides. Dust exploded up from the ground like it had been waiting for the cue. The first RPG slammed into the lead vehicle, blooming into fire and smoke. Elena's body reacted before thought caught up. She dove sideways, hitting the dirt hard and rolling into a narrow trench as bullets snapped past. So close they stole the air from her lungs, her earpiece, flooded with voices, orders, shouts, curses, but half of it was shredded by static and the percussion of gunfire. Something slammed into her thigh, a searing, cutting pain, not the burning kind, but sharp, like being split open. She sucked in air and rolled, pressing her hand hard against the wound. Blood poured hot between her fingers. Before she could process, another impact ripped into her shoulder, spinning her half sideways. 7 seconds ago, she'd been standing. Now she was bleeding in 2 places. Vision flickering, heart pounding, her training took over. She dragged herself toward a rock outcropping. Teeth gritted so hard, she could hear the grind in her skull. Screams echoed from the convoy center. 2 of the SEALs were already down. Others were laying smoke and firing back in sharp, measured bursts. She fumbled for her tourniquet, hand trembling, and cinched it above the thigh wound. The pain was electric, shooting all the way up into her ribs, but the blood slowed. She made herself look beyond her own injuries, scanning the kill zone. And that's when she saw him, Chief Carter, 20 meters away. Sprawled out in the open, legs twisted unnaturally. Blood pooling beneath his lower back. There was no cover near him, no one else close enough. And she could tell, the rate he was bleeding, seconds, maybe less before he'd be gone. She didn't think. She moved. Her body screamed at her the moment she pushed off. But she forced her legs forward. Bullets hissed past. One grazing her helmet hard enough to ring her skull. Another slammed into the side of her vest, knocking her half sideways, pain flaring in her ribs where the plate had stopped most. But not all of the round. She hit the dirt, rolled, and crawled, gravel digging into her palms, grit between her teeth. 10 meters, 7-4. Everything blurred except Carter's still body. Her fingers were on him before she realized she'd made it. Blood soaked into her gloves instantly. His pulse was faint, erratic, breathing shallow. One wound in his back, another in his thigh. He was bleeding out fast. She ripped into her medkit, stuffing gauze into the wounds, wrapping a compression bandage so tight her own hand shook. Tourniquet on the thigh. Carter groaned faintly as she tightened it. Her gloves were slick now, his blood and hers mixing. Gunfire spat into the dirt inches from her boots. She threw herself over him, instinctively shielding his body with hers. The world narrowed to her heartbeat and the weight beneath her. Then, silence. Not safety, just the eye of the storm. Smoke hung in the air above the ridges. She could see insurgents moving, retreating or repositioning, radio still dead. No backup in sight. She looked down at Carter. His face was gray, his eyes closed. And that's when the thought settled in with perfect clarity. No one was coming if they were going to survive. She would have to carry him out herself. How far can a human body go before it simply quits? She didn't know, but she was about to find out. Ruiz shifted Carter's gear off him. Trying not to jar the wounds, his rifle slid to the dirt, clattering against the rocks. The vest came. Next, heavy with plates, magazines, and dust, she could hear her own breath in short, broken pulls, even stripped of gear. He was still dead weight, more than 100 pounds of unconscious muscle, all limp and uncooperative. When she rolled him toward her, his body collapsed into her lap, forcing the air from her lungs. The sudden load sent a lightning bolt of pain up her injured side and into her wounded shoulder. She bit down hard, tasting metal in her mouth. She braced her boots, found leverage, and pulled. The fireman's carry wasn't graceful. It never was. Even in training with a healthy partner and no one shooting at you. Now, with blood running down her arm and her leg wrapped in a tourniquet that throbbed with every heartbeat, it felt impossible. Her left hip felt like it was being pried apart from the inside. Her shoulder muscles were shaking, the wounded one screaming like a live wire. She got as far as standing before her legs buckled once, twice, threatening to collapse under the strain. "Come on," she hissed to herself, more command than pleasure. Boots dug into the gravel, one step, then another. The incline ahead rose like an accusation. The dirt shifted treacherously under her soles, making every footfall uncertain. One slip could send them both tumbling back into the kill zone. She didn't dare look behind her. The sound of gunfire was still out there, sharp cracks echoing. Across the valley, it was distant enough to keep her moving, but close enough to keep her pulse in overdrive. She focused forward. The valley was narrowing now, funneling them into a slot of rock and shadow. She had studied the map at the mission briefing. She knew the extraction fallback was 2 miles from here, near an old rusted bridge. 2 miles had sounded like nothing then. Now, with Carter's blood soaking through her uniform and her own, dripping down her side, it felt like the other side of the world. Her thighs burned. Her lower back was screaming in hot, rhythmic pulses. Every jolt of her step pressed Carter's injuries into her shoulder, sending a wet heat down her back where his blood met hers. Her breath rasped in her throat. The copper taste in her mouth made her swallow and gag at the same time. She didn't know if it was her blood or his. Probably both. She adjusted his weight, grunting at the shift in balance. It helped for half a step, then made the next worse. Her mind tried to wander, to think about what would happen if she went down, what it would mean for him, for her, but she didn't let it. She locked herself into a single loop, one step, then another. The wind picked up as the valley funneled tighter. The rock faces on either side rose like jagged walls, and the path narrowed until it was barely wider than her boots. On one side, a steep rise of loose shale. On the other, a 30-foot drop into a dry ravine lined with boulders that looked like broken teeth. She stopped just long enough to press her good hand to the rock wall for balance. Her wrist screamed when she leaned on it. She wasn't sure if it was broken or just sprained beyond reason. She didn't care. It was the only thing keeping them upright. Halfway across the ledge, a gunshot cracked from behind. The impact of the round into the rock sent dust and stone fragments exploding just feet from her face. Another shot, then another. She turned her head enough to catch the flash of movement on the ridge. 3 figures, dark shapes against the glare. She couldn't tell if they'd seen Carter or thought she was alone. It didn't matter. She eased him down against the inside of the ledge, wedging his body into the narrowest cover she could find. His head lolled sideways, pale and still. Her pistol came free from its holster with a clumsy tug. Her fingers trembled so badly that the magazine clinked against the grip as she reloaded. She leaned out from the rock, aimed with her offhand, and squeezed the trigger twice. The recoil drove pain straight up her arm. She bit her cheek to keep from crying out. One figure dropped, the other scattered. She ducked back behind cover, breathing so hard it felt like her lungs were on fire. Silence followed, that loaded. Deceptive kind. She holstered the pistol, turned back to Carter, and put her hand over his chest. The rise and fall was there, but shallow. Blood seeped slowly from the bandages. "You stay with me," she whispered. "You don't get to check out yet." She forced his arm back over her shoulder and stood. This time, her knees bent so far under the load she thought they'd give for good. She moved forward anyway. Minutes blurred into each other. Her muscles stopped feeling like they belonged to her. Her body had shifted into something mechanical, a system of steps and balance and endurance. Pain was a constant, but it wasn't the main thought anymore. The trail widened slightly, then dropped into a shallow gully littered with old supply. Crates, rusted metal, and the skeletal remains of a burned-out MRAP. The sight was almost a comfort. A landmark from the satellite images. She stumbled toward it, boots dragging in the dirt. Carter's weight forcing her forward like a tether. When she reached the wreck, her body quit without asking permission. She crumpled beside it, Carter sliding from her shoulders into the dust. Her hands were numb, her lips cracked from thirst. Her head throbbed from blood loss. She crawled to him on her elbows and checked his pulse. Still there, weak. A memory rose unbidden. Her first combat deployment in Syria, the firefight near the Iraq border. The moment she'd almost bled out from a neck wound while dragging a wounded private to safety. She remembered the heat of the blood, the sound of her own pulse roaring in her ears. But this felt worse. This was slower, quieter. Her eyes drifted upward, scanning the sky for birds, for choppers, for anything. Nothing. Just the thin, metallic buzz of wind slipping between the rocks. And then, for a moment, she swore she heard a voice. Her brother's, Javier, dead 10 years now. "Pain means you're still alive," he'd said to her once. "Don't feel it, then worry." She wasn't sure if it was a memory or delirium, maybe. "Both. Still hurts," she whispered back. Carter moaned faintly. It snapped her back into motion. She packed more gauze into the worst of his wounds, tightening the compression bandage until her hand shook. The tourniquet on his thigh was still holding, but barely. The horizon was dimming. Nightfall was creeping toward them, and she knew what that meant here. Cold, darkness, and an enemy with the advantage. If she didn't make the extraction zone before it was fully dark, they'd disappear in this valley. She pushed herself upright. Every joint screamed. Her ankle throbbed with each pulse of her heart. She adjusted his weight across her shoulders. Again, locked her legs, and walked. She didn't know how far she'd gone, only that she was still going. The path twisted through rock and dust. Her boots left smeared tracks of blood. A breadcrumb trail she couldn't erase. The wind grew stronger, lifting grit into her eyes. She blinked hard, vision tunneling. The pounding in her skull kept time with her steps. Somewhere ahead was the bridge. Somewhere behind was death, and all she could do was keep moving. What keeps you moving when your body is begging you to stop? She didn't have an answer, just a stubborn, grinding refusal to quit. Her boots slid on the loose gravel again, the weight on her shoulders dragging her toward the ground. Each step sent a jagged tremor through her wounded leg. The tourniquet was still holding, but she could feel the muscle beneath it weakening, trembling in fits. Her wounded shoulder burned with every jostle of Carter's weight. Her ribs ached where the round had punched through the side of her vest earlier, bruised bone grating with every breath. Her side was slick with blood, that felt both hot and cold at once. She could hear her own breath over everything. Harsh. Uneven, she forced it into a rhythm, like a marching cadence in her head. Step. Breathe. Step. Breathe. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave the pain somewhere to go. Carter shifted slightly on her back, the movement unconscious. His head bumped lightly against her shoulder blade. She whispered over her shoulder without thinking, "Hang on, Chief, I got you." Her words felt too thin for the situation, fragile against the weight of the valley pressing down on them. But saying them kept her grounded, as if keeping him in the conversation would keep him in the fight. The trail narrowed again, bending into a cliffside ledge. She stopped at the edge, sucking in 2 long breaths. One misstep here wouldn't mean injury. It would mean both of them tumbling into the ravine 30 feet below, where jagged rocks waited like teeth. She adjusted her stance, knees bent under the weight. Good hand against the wall for balance. Her wrist protested violently, the pain hot and sharp. But she ignored it. Halfway across, a sound cut through the wind. Not a gunshot, not a voice. A low, metallic hum. She froze, head tilting upward, high. Above, catching the pale sunlight, was the sleek outline of a drone. Small, circling, almost lazy in its movements. Her chest surged with hope so fast it almost buckled her knees. She shifted Carter gently against the wall, freeing her bloodied hand, and waved. The motion was clumsy, almost weak, but she waved again and again. No change. The drone didn't dip or hover lower. No flare of recognition, no sound of a responding aircraft. Her stomach sank, recon only still. She waved until her arm felt like lead. Then she forced Carter's weight back into position and kept moving. The ledge widened into a rocky slope. She managed to climb it, one shaky step at a time, boots slipping on loose stone. Every incline was another chance to fall backward. She didn't. When the trail leveled, she found herself looking at a thin, winding path that cut through 2 massive slabs of rock. The slabs funneled the wind into a constant howl that carried grit into her teeth. She spat, the taste of blood and dust mixing until she couldn't tell them apart. Minutes bled into each other. The light shifted slowly toward evening. Somewhere in the blur of steps, Carter groaned faintly. She almost dropped to her knees with the relief of hearing it. "I'm here," she said instantly, her voice rough. "You're good. Chief, just hold on." He didn't answer, but the sound had been real, and real meant alive. Her good leg was starting to spasm, the muscle twitching involuntarily under the constant strain. Her right ankle throbbed harder with every mile of uneven ground. When the path curved sharply to the left, she caught her boot on a stone and stumbled. Carter's weight pulled her sideways, and they crashed into the dirt. She rolled onto her back, teeth clenched, gasping as fire spread through her ribs. For a long moment, she just lay there, staring up at the pale sky through the haze of dust. She wanted to close her eyes, just for a second, but she knew what that second would turn into. She forced herself upright. Blood was seeping past the tourniquet now, a slow, sticky warmth running down her calf into her boot. She grabbed another strip of fabric from her vest and tied it just above the first, biting down hard to keep from screaming. She cinched it until her vision went spotty. Then she was crawling to Carter, checking his pulse again. Still there, slower than before, she pressed her hand against his chest, feeling the faint, shallow rise and fall. "You promised beers when we got back," she muttered. "Don't make me drink alone." Her voice cracked on the last word. She swallowed it down and shifted his arms over her shoulders again. This time she didn't even try to lift him fully. She bent forward and carried him half drag, half lift, boots pushing. Through the dirt, while his boots trailed grooves behind them, the valley wind shifted. Voices. She froze. Her head turned slowly toward the sound. Not English. Harsh syllables. Clipped. Urgent hunting. Her heart slammed against her ribs. They had followed the blood trail. She moved fast, pressing Carter into a narrow crevice between two rocks. She tore dead brush from a nearby cluster and pulled it over him, the brittle stems scratching her raw arms. Flattening herself beside him, she pulled her pistol again. Her hands were shaking so badly that she had to press the grip hard into her palm, just to keep it steady. Shadows appeared at the ridge. 3 of them. They moved like men who thought they were alone. Rifles loose, heads scanning casually. She exhaled slowly and aimed. The first shot hit center mass. The man folded instantly. The second shot went wide. The other 2 scattered. She adjusted. Fired again. 1 went down. The last turned and bolted out of sight. She kept her sights up for another 60 seconds. Her heartbeat thundering so loud she could barely hear the wind silence. She dropped the pistol to the dirt and turned back to Carter. His skin was cooler now. His lips were cracked. His pulse was there, but so thin she could barely feel it. She didn't let herself think about what would happen if she stopped. Instead, she hauled him back over her shoulders and started forward. Her body was beyond pain now, past exhaustion into some strange mechanical survival state where the only thing left was movement. Her mind retreated behind the task, blocking out the blood loss. The bullets still lodged inside her, the cold creeping into her limbs. Ahead, she pictured the bridge, rusted rails, cracked concrete, the faded spray-painted American flag from the mission photos. If she could make it there, maybe the drone would mark her. Maybe someone would come one step, then another and another. How close can salvation be before it still feels like a mirage? She wasn't sure anymore. The valley bent again, funneling her through another jagged gap in the rock. When she stepped out the other side, the light shifted, warmer, angled lower. Evening was coming fast, and there it was, the bridge. It shimmered faintly in the heat haze, floating at the edge of her vision. At first, she thought it was another trick of her brain, a hallucination like the flashes of her brother's voice she'd been hearing. But when she blinked, it stayed. Cracked concrete slabs, rusted steel supports, the faint, ghosted outline of the spray-painted American flag along one railing. She'd studied it in the mission briefing. But right now it looked like a gate to something beyond survival, as if crossing it would seal them back into the world of the living. Emotion hit so hard it nearly buckled her knees, but the bridge wasn't close. Between her and that promise lay a dried-out canal bed, its basin littered with jagged stones, shattered glass, and rusted metal debris from forgotten fights. Her boot caught on a twisted piece of rebar within the first 10 steps. She almost went down. The sudden lurch dragging Carter's weight against her wounded shoulder, so hard she had to choke back a shout. She stopped, breathing hard. Every breath rattled in her chest now, the pain sharp enough to steal air entirely if she let it. Her right ankle had swollen so badly she could feel it pressing against the boot leather. Her left leg trembled in constant rebellion against the load. Still, she moved 10 more steps. Then her knee gave way completely. They both went down hard. Carter rolled off her back into the dirt, his body heavy and limp. For a moment, she just lay there, staring straight up at the pale sky as the dust drifted back down. She could feel the pull to just stay. Let the earth take her weight, let it all stop. But she didn't close her eyes. She turned her head toward Carter. His chest was rising, barely. His breath came in whistling, shallow pulls. The space between each inhale was longer than before. IF. She didn't get him help in minutes. He'd be gone. And if she stopped moving, she'd go with him. She dragged herself over to him, her palms scraping across gravel and glass until they burned. She hooked her arms under his and began to drag, inch by inch. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't even steady. Her boots dug into the dirt behind her, pushing her weight forward while her arms pulled him over the broken ground. She stopped twice, once to add more gauze to the wound at his side, once to stop her own vision from spinning so badly she couldn't see straight. She talked to herself in low bursts to keep conscious. and names of everyone in her unit. A half-remembered song her mother used to sing while cleaning the kitchen back in Chicago. The numbers from her high school locker combination. Anything that kept her from slipping into that dangerous quiet. And then she heard it. Not the drones. Faint hum this time. Something heavier. The low, rhythmic thump of rotor blades. She froze, head tilting toward the sound. It was distant at first. So faint she wondered if her mind had invented it. But it grew louder, the pattern unmistakable. Her heart jumped so fast it hurt. A Black Hawk. It was banking low over the ridge, scanning the valley. Her breath came faster now, panic and hope in equal measure. "They're here," she rasped. To Carter, though she didn't know if he could hear her, "They're here, Chief." Her hands fumbled for the emergency flare in her vest. The plastic cap refused to come off. She dropped it, picked it up again. Her vision was tilting, the horizon slanting dangerously. Breathe. Focus. She got the cap off and snapped it. The flare hissed weakly at first, a thin trickle of smoke curling into the air for one terrible second. She thought it might sputter out, but then it caught, blooming into a thick red plume. She waved it overhead with both hands, the movement pulling at every injury she had. Her shoulders screamed. Her ribs felt like they were being pried apart. Black Hawk turned. It was coming. Her knees gave out. Dropping her beside Carter in the dirt, she tried to smile at him, though her lips barely moved. "We're going to make it," she whispered. "We're going to make it, Chief." She didn't remember the exact moment the Black Hawk touched. Down, just flashes. The violent blast of rotor wash kicking sand into her eyes. Dark silhouettes in tactical gear sprinting toward her. Hands grabbing at Carter, lifting him away. Voices shouting her name over the noise. Someone knelt beside her, pressed a needle into her arm. The world began to dim. She fought it for just a second, forcing her voice out over the chaos. "He's alive. Don't let him die." Then the darkness took her. Not sleep, not unconsciousness, but the heavy, deep surrender of a body that has done all it can inside the Black Hawk. The noise was relentless. Rotors, wind, medics shouting vitals over the coms. Sergeant Elellanena Ruiz lay strapped to a stretcher, her body trembling from shock. Tubes ran from both arms, her uniform soaked through with blood, mud, and sweat. A medic pressed a fresh bandage into her side, his hands slick. BP dropping. Someone called out. Heart rate spiking. She's crashing. Carter lay on the stretcher next to her. Medics working in rapid bursts. Chest seals, IVs, compressions when his pulse dipped. She carried him 2 miles like this? One medic said over the noise, shaking his head in disbelief. "No idea how she's even breathing." The other didn't answer. He just kept working. Ruiz drifted in and out. Once, she opened her eyes enough to catch a blurred image of Carter's face, pale, bloodied, but strangely calm. Then she was somewhere else entirely. Not in the helicopter, not in Afghanistan, but in the narrow alley behind her building in Chicago, age 5, crying over a scraped knee from a fall off her bike. Her brother's hand lifting her up, his voice steady. "You don't quit just 'cause it hurts." Pain ripped through her chest. Then, nothing. A flatline screamed over the medics' headsets. One dropped the oxygen mask and started compressions. Charging. Clear. Her body jolted hard against the stretcher. Once, then again. A weak pulse returned. The helicopter surged forward, cutting through the mountains toward Bagram. 7 minutes to trauma. Both of them unconscious. Both still. Alive, for now. What does survival look like in fluorescent light? Different, colder. Too clean for the amount of blood it takes to get here. The Black Hawk's skids hit the tarmac with a hard jolt. The moment the doors slid open, the medics were in motion. Shouting, guiding, lifting, bright floodlights washed over everything. The air smelled different here. A mix of hot rotor wash and antiseptic from the waiting trauma team. 2 gurneys waited side by side. Carter was rolled out first, his body braced. With straps and tubing, his skin was gray, his chest bandaged in thick layers that were already stained through. Ruiz followed, her own stretcher lifted and pushed forward under the hard stare of the trauma chief. Her leg was in full traction, her shoulder still bleeding through the temporary wrap. 7 gunshot wounds. One medic reported over the chaos. Left thigh, left shoulder, left side penetration. 2 to the lower back with plate stop. 2 grazes to the helmet. Multiple fractures, probable rib and ankle, collapsed lung partial. Multiple GSWs to the patient next to her. She carried him for over 2 miles under fire. A surgeon in a blood protection apron snapped his head up. She carried him like this? The medic's jaw tightened, never stopped. The odd doors swung open, and the light changed. Wider, harder, buzzing faintly overhead. The 2 gurneys split instantly. Carter veered left toward OR2, Ruiz right toward OR1. The sound of boots and wheels and beeping monitors filled the corridor. Voices overlapped in rapid-fire bursts. Blood type? O negative. Chest seals in place. Run vitals. BP's unstable. Hang another unit. The smell of blood mixed with sterilizer. A sharp metallic tang clinging to the air. For Ruiz, the world became disjointed. Flashes of ceiling tiles, masks bending over her. The cold slap of antiseptic against her skin. GSW left femur. Femoral artery missed by millimeters. Fracture in the humerus. Shrapnel still in place. Lung collapse partial. Prepping for chest tube. Someone pressed an oxygen mask to her face. Her eyelids felt too heavy to keep open. The last thing she saw was a light overhead turning into a blurry halo before it all went dark. The surgeries began almost simultaneously for Carter. Removal of 2 rounds, repair of a torn artery, re-expansion of a collapsed lung. Blood transfusions ran steady. Bags swapped out in silence by nurses whose eyes never left the monitors. For Ruiz, debridement of all 7 wounds. Removal of shrapnel from her hip. Repairs to a partially collapsed lung. Pinning of a fractured femur. Resetting a dislocated shoulder. It was 10 hours before both operating room doors swung open again. They're alive, the chief surgeon said finally, rubbing his eyes. I don't know how, but they're alive. In the quiet beyond the OR, the hospital wing felt like another world. The constant beeping of monitors was softer here. The light dimmer, Ruiz lay still, her body swallowed in blankets, tubes running from her arms and nose. The oxygen mask covered half her face. One leg was elevated, her shoulder heavily wrapped, her ribs bound tight. Next door, Carter's room looked much the same. Pale skin, surgical gauze wrapped across his chest and thigh. The slow and steady rise and fall of a chest that had nearly stopped twice that day. Word of their arrival spread faster than paperwork could catch it. First among the medics, then the infantry units. By the time the reports reached the brass, the story already sounded like something from another era. A combat medic carrying a Navy SEAL through 2 miles of hostile terrain with 7 bullets in her body. General Keenan, theater commander, stood at the end of the hall when the official report landed in his hands. He read it once, then again. It sounded impossible. He'd been in uniform for 3 decades and never seen anything like it. But the drone footage confirmed every detail. Ruiz moving through the valley, stumbling but never stopping. Carter's limp frame over her shoulders, red flare in the final stretch. She hadn't stopped for nearly 2 hours, Keenan said. Quietly, didn't pass out until he was safe. The major standing beside him waited for the next words. We're putting her in for the Distinguished Service Cross, Keenan said, and I want the president to hear about it before the media does. The major nodded. What about Carter? Silver Star recommendation. Make it clear. He lived because she wouldn't quit. Keenan's voice was steady. Get a team on this. When she wakes up, someone tells her exactly what she did. Hours later, Ruiz stirred for the first time. It was small at first. A twitch of her fingers, a slow draw of breath that seemed heavier than it should have been. Her body felt like it had been filled with sand and lead at the same time, weighed down on every inch. She tried to move her hand. Nothing. Tried to move her toes. Nothing. The pain came back slowly, like cold water rising around her limbs. A deep ache in her ribs, a steady burn in her shoulder, the hot, raw throb of her leg. The sounds came next, the soft, steady beep of a heart monitor, the rhythmic hiss of air through tubes, footsteps somewhere outside her room. When she opened her eyes, the ceiling tiles swam above her. A shadow moved beside her bed. She turned her head an inch, wincing as her neck protested. "You're awake." The voice was male, calm, familiar in tone though not in memory. A young army doctor stood near the monitors, clipboard in hand, a brown undershirt under his scrubs. "You're at Bagram Medical," he said, approaching slowly. "You made it." Her lips felt cracked when she tried to speak. "Mason." The doctor smiled faintly. "Alive next room. You both made it." She didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until it escaped in a shaky exhale. "You've been out for about 30 hours, he continued. "We stabilized you, but you're going to need more surgery. Leg, shoulder, lung. But you're here." She nodded faintly. Her body felt like a battlefield, but none of it mattered compared to that one word. "Alive. Is he talking?" She managed. "Not yet. Still on sedatives. Vitals are good, though. Very good. Considering what he's been through." She stared at the ceiling, her mind dragging itself back to the trail. The bridge, the flare, the burning in her lungs. None of it had been a dream. "You're being recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross," the doctor said after a pause. She shook her head slightly. "I don't need a medal. I just didn't want him to die." "I know," the doctor said quietly, "but the world's going to hear what you did. They've never seen anything like it. You're already a legend on this base. How do you process something you're not ready to talk about? Sometimes you don't. You just keep breathing until the next moment comes." The door to Ruiz's hospital room opened quietly, and a new voice filled the air. Calm, clipped, precise. "Sergeant Elellanena Ruiz." Ruiz opened her eyes to see a woman in the army dress, blue, standing beside her bed. The tablet in her hand glinted faintly in the fluorescent light, insignia on her collar catching her attention before the face did. "I'm Colonel Ashford. You don't know me, but I know you." Ruiz's mouth was dry. She didn't try to speak. "You don't have to say anything," Ashford continued, stepping closer. "I just wanted you to know every major commander in the region has read your report, and your unit statements and the eyewitness accounts." She glanced at the tablet. "You saved a life under fire, with multiple gunshot wounds. Over hostile terrain, for more than 2 miles. She looked back at Ruiz. "That doesn't just happen. That's not training. That's something else." Ruiz didn't answer. Even hearing it laid out like that made her chest tighten. Her mind was still there, in the dust and smoke, in the sound of Carter's breath rattling against her back. "I've seen the footage," Ashford said. "When you lit that flare, half this base stopped what they were doing. The medevac team said you collapsed with one hand still holding Carter's vest." Ruiz managed a faint, pained smile. "Didn't want to drop him." The colonel tapped something into her tablet. "You're being fast-tracked for the Distinguished Service Cross. Citations already in review. Someone from Washington will visit next week, probably wearing stars." Ruiz's voice was hoarse when she finally asked, "Can he get one too?" "Mason?" Ashford nodded. "He's being submitted for the Silver Star. He held the line until backup arrived, and he survived because you didn't give up." That landed heavier than Ruiz expected. Her eyes drifted toward the door as if she could see through it into the room next to hers. "You both are on the President's daily brief now," Ashford added. "Rest. We'll take it from here." When she left, the room was quiet again. Just the beeping, the faint hum of air through the vents, the window showing a thin slice of Afghan sky fading toward orange. Ruiz turned her head slowly toward the door. She whispered to herself, "I'm not done. Not until I see him open his eyes." The next morning, the nurse helped her into an upright position for the first time. Painkillers dulled the sharpest edges, but every breath still carried the weight of fractured ribs. Her leg was braced, her shoulders strapped tight. Through the glass wall, she could see the door across the hall, the one leading to Carter's room. She'd been watching it for hours, catching glimpses of doctors, nurses, and once, a man in civilian clothes with a government badge stepping inside. No one told her anything new. Still stable, still unconscious, still. She hated that word. Then, just past noon, a young corpsman rushed to her doorway. "He's awake. He's asking for you." The words jolted through her like a current. Within minutes, she was in a temporary wheelchair, medical supports bracing her leg and shoulder. The fear nurse pushed her gently across the hall. The wheels humming against the tile, the door to Carter's room slid open, and light from the high window spilled across the bed. He lay there, pale, tubes still in his arms, chest bound in surgical gauze. His hair was flattened against a pillow, his eyes glassy but focused. He turned his head toward her and tried to smile. It was crooked, weak, but real. "You look like hell," he croaked. Her eyes welled instantly. "You're one to talk." For a moment, neither spoke. The room felt full, not of words, but of everything they both just lived through. "I remember you picking me up," Carter said quietly. "You were fading," she replied. "I didn't think you'd stay." Conscious long enough to remember anything. "I didn't," he said. "But I felt it. I felt someone grab me, heard your voice. It gave me something to hold on to." She lowered her eyes. "I didn't think we were going to make it, but—" "We did," he nodded faintly. "Yeah, we did." He shifted slightly, wincing at the pain. "I heard what you did. 2 miles, 7 bullets. You carried me. You would have done the same," she said. He huffed a soft laugh. "I wouldn't have made it 100 feet. They both smiled at that. The kind of smile that isn't about humor, but about being able to smile at all after what they'd faced. After a moment, Carter asked, "You get a medal or something?" "They're working on it," she said. "Distinguished Service Cross." "You deserve it," he said simply. Her gaze shifted to the floor for a second before meeting his again. "You held off 5 shooters with a busted radio and no backup. You kept breathing. That matters too." He studied her face, his voice quieter now. "General said it only happened because you refused to die." "Well," she said with a faint smirk. "I'm stubborn. Ask anyone in my unit." Silence again. Not awkward, but weighted. Then he asked the question she'd been expecting since the moment she walked in. "Why didn't you leave me?" The words sat heavy between them. "I had the option," she admitted. "They'd have understood if I made it out alone." She paused. "But I didn't join the army to understand what loss means. I joined so fewer people would have to feel it, and I couldn't feel it again. Not for you." Carter's jaw tightened. He blinked once, looked away briefly, then back at her. "I owe you my life." "We're soldiers," she said. "We do what we're trained to do. But sometimes we go past training. I didn't carry you because of orders. I carried you because I could, and because someone needed to." He was quiet for a long time. After that, finally, he said, "I've lost people, brothers. I thought I was ready to go. Then I heard you shouting at me, telling me to fight. I don't think anyone's done that for me in a long time." "You weren't done," she said firmly, "and neither am I." The nurse came in quietly to change Carter's dressings, and Ruiz took that as her cue to leave. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said. "Don't?" He replied quickly, then caught himself. "I mean, come back tonight. I don't want to sleep before seeing you again." She smiled faintly. "Deal." As the door closed behind her, Carter leaned back against the pillow, eyes half shut, mind replaying the image of her silhouette against it. Red flare. She had carried him through a place where most people stopped, through a door most never returned from, and slammed it shut behind them. What does recognition feel like after you've already decided you didn't need it? For Ruiz, it was complicated. 3 months later, the sky over Fort Bragg was a crisp, impossible blue. Rows of soldiers stood at attention on the parade ground. Their uniforms sharp, boots lined in perfect symmetry. Flags stirred in a faint breeze that did nothing to cut the heat of the sun. On the small platform at the front, Sergeant Elellanena Ruiz stood in her own dress blues. Her posture was perfect, back straight, chin level. The medal she already wore caught the sunlight in sharp flashes. Beneath the fabric, pain still lingered. The leg that had carried Carter was pinned together with surgical hardware. The shoulder repaired but not fully strong. General Hargrove stepped forward, a small velvet box in hand. His voice was clear, formal, carrying across the courtyard without effort. For extraordinary heroism and selfless service under fire. For saving the life of a fellow warrior at great personal risk. For exhibiting courage beyond the limits of human endurance. The United States Army awards you the Distinguished Service Cross. The applause was instant, not polite, not restrained, a wave of sound that rolled across the courtyard. Breaking the rigid discipline of posture, it was the kind of applause you couldn't fake, the kind that carried pride and disbelief in equal measure. Every soldier there had heard the story. Many had seen the drone footage, but seeing her now, alive, upright, bearing the weight of the medal with quiet steadiness, made it more than a story. It made it real. Ruiz stepped forward, accepted the medal without a word, and returned to her place. Her face was calm, composed, but her eyes held something deeper. Not pride, not exactly. Something forged on a dusty mountain trail with a man's life across her shoulders. Behind her, Carter stood in his own dress uniform, still walking with a cane. His silver star shone faintly on his chest. But his eyes weren't on the crowd or the cameras. They were locked on Ruiz when the ceremony ended. The crowd surged forward. Handshakes, congratulations, quick words of gratitude from officers and enlisted alike. Photographers jostled for angles. Ruiz moved through it slowly, answering when spoken to, but not lingering in any one conversation. The noise felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. Eventually, she and Carter slipped away toward the base chapel, finding a quiet bench in the shade of a line of trees. The parade field stretched out in front of them, the flag still moving in the breeze. Carter sat down first, lowering himself carefully. "Didn't think I'd ever see this place again," he said. "Me neither," Ruiz admitted. "But I'm glad we did." They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the ceremony fading behind them. "Do you ever think about going back?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the trees. She exhaled slowly. "I think about it, but I'm not sure I could walk into another op without hearing that gunfire. Or feeling your weight on my back." He nodded, eyes still forward. "I still hear the crack of that first shot sometimes in my sleep in the shower." "Me too." He turned toward her. "But I also remember the way you kept going. Bleeding, barely breathing. You just didn't stop." A faint laugh escaped her. "You think, if I stopped, you'd still be here to complain about it?" He smiled, but it faded quickly. "I wouldn't have made it." "That's not drama. That's fact. You didn't save me by luck, Ruiz. You did it by will." She looked down at her hands, flexing them slowly. "It wasn't just will. I was angry. Angry at the war. Angry that you were hit. Angry that I couldn't stop it. So I moved, and that's what separates you." Carter said, "Some people freeze when they feel that. You moved. You bled for it." The quiet returned, softer this time. The sun dipped slightly, painting the tops of the trees gold. "You know," she said, "when I joined the army, I thought I'd be just another intel sergeant, safe, quiet. Then I got good at field work, started training with combat teams, got better. Still, I never expected this." "That's the thing," he said. Real war doesn't give you time to expect. It just hands you the moment, and you either rise or you don't. She nodded. We rose. He smiled faintly. We did. After a while, they stood and started walking back toward the main road. Her limp was subtle now. His was more pronounced. No parade. No applause. Just two soldiers walking side by side. Not quite whole, but far from broken. What happens after the story leaves the battlefield? Sometimes it grows bigger than you ever intended. Weeks after the ceremony, a military podcast aired a special episode titled The Mountain Fire Team. The voice of the host was steady, reverent. As he described the mission, a wounded Army sergeant carrying a Navy SEAL across 2 miles of hostile terrain. 7 bullets in her body, relentless enemy fire at her back. They played sound bites from interviews with other soldiers on the mission, voices still carrying the awe they'd felt when the medevac report came in. They talked about the drone footage, the grainy, almost surreal video of a lone figure moving through the dust, stumbling but never falling, the limp body of a man over her shoulders. The episode spread quickly, first through military circles, then into mainstream media. News articles followed, requests for interviews, invitations to speak at schools, leadership forums, veteran events. Ruiz accepted some, declined most. She didn't enjoy the spotlight, never had. But she wasn't naive. She knew that sometimes stories like hers could be more than a headline. They could remind people of something war often stripped away. The quiet endurance that doesn't make the action reels, but still saves lives. If telling it makes one person push a little harder, she told Carter one evening, or fight a little longer when they want to quit, then maybe it's worth it. He'd nodded. It's worth it. They stayed close after Afghanistan, not in the way most people might imagine, but in the way survivors do, bound by a moment no one else could fully understand. Some days they talked about it. Some days they didn't. They didn't need to. The memory lived in both of them. The sound of shots cracking across the ridges, the weight, the burning in her lungs, the red flare cutting through the dust. For Carter, it was the image of her silhouette under that smoke, moving when logic said she shouldn't be able to. For Ruiz, it was the sound of his voice coming back to her in the middle of the valley. Faint but alive, one autumn afternoon, months later, they met again. No uniforms this time, just jeans and jackets. They sat on a bench outside a small cafe, the kind of place where no one recognized them. The air smelled of coffee and cold. Leaves. People walked past, unaware they were sharing a sidewalk with 2 people who had stared death down together. You ever think about that day? Carter asked quietly, sipping from a paper cup. Every day, she admitted, but not always in the same way. He nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. They sat in a comfortable quiet for a while. Then Carter said, "You know, I thought a lot about why you didn't drop me, why you didn't try to make it out alone." She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was calm. "Because if you had died there, it would have been my loss too. And I decided a long time ago that I'd rather hurt from the weight of carrying someone than from the weight of knowing I didn't try." Carter's gaze dropped to the ground, his jaw flexing once. "Guess I'm glad you're stubborn." She smiled faintly. "Guess I am too." Over the next year, the calls and emails asking her to speak slowed. New stories filled the headlines. The war kept moving, but on bases across the country, in training rooms, in small barracks, at forward operating posts, her name still came up. The drone footage still made the rounds. Her story was still told, sometimes with the facts bent a little, sometimes exactly as it had happened. She didn't correct anyone. She didn't need to, because she knew the truth, that it wasn't about medals or speeches or even survival. It was about the moment when everything in her body told her to stop, and she didn't. On the anniversary of the mission, Ruiz visited Carter at his home. His limp was still there, though lighter now. Her own legs still ached in the cold. They sat in his backyard as the sun went down, the light turning everything gold. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. After a long pause, Carter said, "You know, people keep calling me a hero for making it back. But I didn't make it back. You brought me back." She shook her head. "We made it back." He didn't argue. Later that night, she walked home alone, her breath clouding in the cool air. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. She thought about the valley, the sound of gravel under her boots, the hiss of the flare, the low thump of the Black Hawk in the distance, and she thought about something her brother used to say before he died. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. That day in the valley, she hadn't been thinking about speeches or cameras or medals. She hadn't even been thinking about herself. She'd been thinking about one thing, that Carter was still breathing, and she had the strength to keep him that way for one more step, and then one more, and then one more after that, until the steps ended.